Welcome to Let Jesus Be Your Doctor, the true path to healing for body and soul.
In July of 1947, Europe was, well, it was essentially a graveyard.
Yeah, utterly devastated.
Right. Entire cities were just reduced to rubble. You had millions of people displaced. Rationing was this daily nightmare. And the collective psychological trauma was, it's almost unfathomable to us today.
Mm-hmm.
If there was ever a time and a place where earthly help seemed completely, just utterly impossible, it was post-war Germany.
Absolutely.
And yet, sitting right in the middle of all that devastation, a woman named Bertha Dudde wrote a document claiming that human suffering was, in most cases, a completely unnecessary choice.
Which is a staggering thing to say in 1947.
It really is. So welcome to today's deep dive, where we are looking at a collection of texts that take the concept of faith, which, we usually treat as this passive, fragile sort of hope, and reconstructs it as an absolute measurable law of physics.
It is a profound shift in perspective. The dossier that you, our listener, have provided us with, it centers on Dudde's revelation number 4082. It's titled, With God, Nothing is Impossible. But it doesn't stop there. It surrounds her writing with this incredible chorus of voices from Christian mystics and teachers throughout history. And they're all pointing toward a highly specific mechanical loop of human action.
Right.
We're looking at a framework that treats the so-called supernatural, not as magic, but as the natural result of human will perfectly aligning with active charity.
And just to set the stage here, we're going to examine these texts deeply, but impartially.
Yes.
We're looking at the mechanics of this belief system, the psychological architecture it demands, and the practical steps it outlines for rewiring how you experience reality. We aren't here to preach or take a side.
No, we're looking at this as a fascinating piece of spiritual psychology.
Exactly. And the tone of the source material, it's very meditative. It asks the reader to really slow down.
Mm-hmm.
So we are going to read Bertha Dudde's original text directly. We're going to take it piece by piece to understand exactly how she constructs this argument.
I think that's the best way to do it. Just dive right into the primary source.
Right. So she begins the revelation with this foundational premise. I'll just read it here. Where no earthly help seems possible anymore, there the love of God is often clearly recognizable, which lets even the seemingly impossible happen so that people learn to believe in him and love him above all.
Let's pause there, because the psychological framing of the impossible here is the key to unlocking this entire text.
Yeah, she starts right at the edge of human capability.
Exactly. Dudde explicitly ties divine intervention to the total exhaustion of earthly solutions, where no earthly help seems possible anymore. She's describing the vacuum created by human failure.
It almost sounds like a prerequisite. The impossible can't happen until all the regular possible things have completely failed.
Right, because from a behavioral standpoint, as long as human beings have a backup plan, money and savings, a professional we can hire, some strategy we can deploy our ego remains firmly in the driver's seat.
Oh, for sure. We rely entirely on our own finite resources.
Right. So Dudde's text posits that the impossible is utilized as a deliberate teaching tool. The human is allowed to reach the absolute limit of their capability to create the necessary vacuum for divine power to enter.
Because she says it happens so that people learn to believe.
Yes, the crisis itself is pedagogical. It's meant to teach.
That makes sense. Okay, let me read the next part of her text. For God there are no limits to his power, and what he wills happens. So there is also nothing that would be unfulfillable, because with God, everything is possible.
It's an absolute baseline. It demands an immediate rescaling of reality.
Yeah, she doesn't write that God can help a little bit, or that the divine merely comforts you while you fail. She states there is nothing unfulfillable, zero limits.
Which is a very bold claim.
It is, and honestly, it makes the very next line of her revelation incredibly jarring. I read this part and immediately felt a wall of resistance.
Oh, the part about unnecessary torment.
Yes. Let me read it. People, therefore, often torment themselves unnecessarily through earthly life, because if they want to be able to achieve the extraordinary, they only need to ask God for help. He can always help, and he will always help.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
I am so stuck on that phrase, unnecessary torment. Let's really unpack this. If it is truly that simple, if all anyone has to do to achieve the extraordinary is just ask for help because he will always help, why is the world completely saturated with suffering?
Right.
Why was the world of 1947 saturated with suffering? It sounds like humanity has this fully funded, infinite bank account in its name, But we are all choosing to sleep on the concrete and scrounge for pennies. Why would anyone choose the pennies?
Well, it sounds cruel on the surface, doesn't it? But Dudde anticipates this exact paradox. The failure point in this theology is not located in the divine's willingness to give.
The bank account is fully funded.
Exactly. The failure point is entirely located in the human capacity to receive.
Okay, what does that actually mean, though? The capacity to receive.
Well, if the money is in the bank, but you refuse to walk into the building because you don't believe the bank exists.
Right.
Or, you insist on trying to forge your own currency in your basement because you demand total self-reliance, you're going to remain impoverished.
Wow, okay.
Dudde is arguing that humanity is obsessed with forging its own currency. We are trapped in this stubborn cycle of self-reliance. We want to fix the unfixable with our own hands, which ironically guarantees the continuation of this unnecessary torment.
So the torment is a byproduct of our isolation. We are actively choosing the isolation.
That's the argument, yes.
But how do we break out of that? Because she says we just need to ask for help, but clearly millions of people ask for help every day and they remain in torment. There has to be a mechanism behind the asking, right?
There is. In the next section of the Revelation, she explains that accessing this help requires a specific active connection. It is not just about throwing a desperate thought into the void.
Okay.
Dudde outlines what we might call an action-faith loop.
Let's read that next part then, because this really shifts from abstract theology to a literal blueprint. She writes, but they can only gain this faith by practicing neighborly love.
Wait, I just want to note that the source material points out the original German word there is Nächstenliebe.
Nächstenliebe.
Yeah.
Which translates to charity or love of the nearest one. Right?
Exactly. Act of charity. Go ahead.
Okay, so because every good deed establishes the connection with him, and thereby the receipt of power is secured, which as an emanation of God must inevitably lead back to God.
It completely destroys the idea that faith is a purely intellectual exercise.
Yeah, she says you can only gain this faith by practicing that neighborly love.
You cannot sit in a quiet room and think your way into this kind of limit-breaking faith. Look at the mechanical vocabulary she uses here. Establishes the connection. Receipt of power is secured. Emanation.
It sounds like she's describing an electrical circuit.
It really does.
Let me see if I can map this out. If divine omnipotence is a power plant, humming with infinite voltage, a human being is just a light bulb sitting on a table, unattached to the wall.
Right.
You can pray to the power plant all you want. You can cry about being in the dark. But until you are physically plugged into the grid, the filament won't glow.
And Dudde is stating unequivocally that neighborly love, tangible, self-sacrificial deeds of kindness toward other human beings is the copper wire.
Active charity is the copper wire.
Every good deed establishes the connection. When you show unconditional love to the person next to you, you plug your wire into the grid.
Wow.
And the text is incredibly definitive about what happens next. The receipt of power is secured. Not maybe, not sometimes. The power emanates from the divine, flows through the human act of love, and inevitably returns to its source, creating a closed, infinite loop.
And she finishes that paragraph by saying, and he must learn to believe and will do so if he strives for the heights with serious will. This completely inverts how most people view the relationship between belief and action. I mean, the common assumption is that I need to build up my faith first, right?
Right.
And once my belief is strong enough, then I will go out and do good deeds.
Exactly. We put the feeling before the action.
But Dudde is saying the exact opposite. You don't have faith.
Correct.
Go serve your neighbor.
Yep.
The physical act of serving them will connect you to the divine, and the power that flows through that connection will generate the faith inside you. You will do so if he strives.
It bypasses human intellect entirely. You don't need to understand the theology to plug in the wire. You just have to bypass your own ego to serve someone else.
Which leads into this fascinating, almost apocalyptic section of the text. And again, keep in mind the post-war ruins she is writing this in. Dudde writes, in the last time before the end, the most wonderful things will happen, which look supernatural and yet only find their explanation in the will of man and the power of faith.
She is completely demystifying the concept of the supernatural here.
Yeah, she literally calls them things that look supernatural but actually have a logical explanation. Let me read the rest of that section. In them lies the whole explanation of everything that seems incomprehensible to you, but which is actually only the consequence of a right way of life before God.
See, in a modern worldview, we tend to define a miracle as a violation of the laws of nature.
Like a glitch in the Matrix.
Exactly. A glitch, a moment where the divine breaks the rules of the universe to intervene. But Dudde argues that miracles are not rule-breaking anomalies. They are the natural, inevitable outcome of a human will that is perfectly aligned with this higher physics.
Like, a smartphone would look supernatural to someone living in the 14th century simply because they don't understand the physics of radio waves and microprocessors.
That's a perfect analogy. A miracle looks supernatural to a person whose will is completely disconnected from active charity. But to the person who is plugged in, the person practicing radical neighborly love, the miracle is simply the consequence of the circuit functioning correctly.
Only the consequence of a right way of life.
Right. It places an immense amount of agency back into the hands of the individual.
You aren't just a passive audience member waiting for a magic trick. You are aligning your daily actions to become a conduit for this higher law.
And she doesn't pull any punches about where this power is actually found, and more importantly, where it is missing in the world.
No, she doesn't. Let's read the final segment of this revelation because it gets very pointed. She writes, "And so it is not enough that people call themselves Christians in form, that they profess the church to which they belong, if they do not live Christianity, if they do not testify through their way of life that they belong to the community of believers which forms the true church of Christ."
It's a heavy critique of superficial religion.
Definitely. And she continues, "Living faith is demanded and active neighborly love in order to let the power of the Spirit become effective. But then man also disposes of extraordinary power, for it is the power from God that flows through him and for which there is no limit."
She draws a hard, undeniable line between institutional titles and individual reality.
Yeah. She finishes the revelation with this. "Thus, man can accomplish unusual things with the power from God, just as God himself can appear in the form of help that seems supernatural, because it often occurs when there is no longer any hope of help."
Belonging to a group, holding a title, performing outward rituals, she dismisses all of this as merely being a Christian in form.
It's like holding a gym membership card in your wallet and expecting your muscles to grow just from having the card.
Right. The card is just a form. It doesn't move the iron.
The burden of proof is entirely on individual action.
Without the action, the circuit remains broken. But when living faith and active neighborly love are present, the human literally disposes of extraordinary power.
Yeah.
God doesn't just fix problems from a distance. The human being becomes the literal instrument of the infinite.
Which requires an absolute surrender of human pride.
Totally.
And that concept of surrender, well, it's the perfect bridge into the next phase of the material you've provided us.
The spiritual impulses.
Yes. Because this dossier doesn't just rely on Bertha Dudde. It curates a selection of teachings from various mystics, healers, and theologians across different eras. They form this incredible historical chorus, all validating this action-faith loop.
It's fascinating how these different voices, separated by centuries, all point to the exact same mechanics.
Let's start with the biblical baseline the document provides. Two texts form the foundation here. Luke 1.37, which says, "For with God nothing shall be impossible," and Mark 9.23, "All things are possible to him that believeth."
The commentary attached to these verses in the source text notes something vital. It says, God knows no limit. Where man reaches his limit, God's possibility begins. But Jesus connects the miracle with faith. Not theoretical faith, but trust that surrenders completely to him.
That second verse, "All things are possible to him that believeth," it's staggering when you really look at it. We normally think of possibility as a fixed wall, right? Like the laws of physics dictate what is possible. But this verse shifts the boundary of possibility away from external physics and places it squarely on the depth of the human's belief.
It removes all of our excuses.
Yeah.
If everything is possible to the one who believes, then our limitations are self-imposed by our doubt.
Which brings us to the next impulse. This one is from Bruno Groening, a spiritual healer in mid-20th century Germany. His impulse reads, "Trust and believe the divine power helps and heals."
Simple, but the accompanying text expands on his philosophy beautifully. It says, he emphasized again and again that man can only receive divine help if he opens himself inwardly. Doubt closes, faith opens. When man directs his heart to God, the healing stream can flow.
The healing stream, the Heilstrom, as he called it.
Right.
Okay, I'm trying to visualize how doubt actually closes the stream. If the power is infinite and always available, like Dudde said, is it essentially a plumbing issue?
A plumbing issue? How so?
Well, think of a massive municipal water reservoir. The pipes leading to my house are perfectly intact and the water is pressurized 24/7. It actively wants to flow.
Okay, I follow you.
But I am standing in my kitchen, dying of thirst, complaining that the water company abandoned me simply because I refused to turn the handle on the faucet.
That is exactly it. The water is there. The pressure is there. The divine does 99.9% of the heavy lifting by maintaining the infinite reservoir. Faith is simply the physical act of tuning the handle.
And doubt is the tightly closed valve.
Precisely.
But why is it so hard to turn the handle? I mean, if we are dying of thirst, if we are in this unnecessary torment, why do we keep the valve closed?
Because opening that valve requires you to admit that you cannot fix the plumbing yourself. It requires total surrender.
You have to admit you need help.
Yes. And that brings us directly to the next mystic in the dossier, Luisa Piccarreta. She was an Italian writer whose work focused on the divine will. Her, quote, cut straight to the heart of why we resist this so much.
Let me read her quote. She writes, "He who lives in my will disposes of the power of God himself, because he no longer acts out of himself, but out of me."
He no longer acts out of himself. That is complete ego death.
The text elaborates on this, saying, "The secret lies not in human capability, but in becoming one with God's will. When man surrenders to God, God acts through him, and what seemed impossible becomes possible because it is no longer man alone."
This addresses the core problem of human weakness.
How so?
Well, when we face an impossible situation, say a terrifying medical diagnosis or financial ruin, our instinct is to try and upgrade our human capability.
Oh, absolutely. We go into overdrive.
We treat ourselves like a computer with a slow processor, and we frantically try to download more RAM. We think, I need to be smarter, I need to work harder, I need to figure this out right now.
We stay trapped in the cycle of self-improvement, which is still fundamentally reliant on the ego.
Exactly. But Piccarreta is saying, your processor is finite. It will always crash eventually. The secret isn't upgrading the human ego, it's turning off your finite processor entirely and allowing the infinite mainframe to run the program through your hardware.
He no longer acts out of himself.
Right. In secular psychology, we actually see shadows of this in the concept of flow states.
Like with athletes.
Yes, elite athletes or musicians. They describe reaching a point where they literally stop thinking. The ego steps aside, and the action simply flows through them. They become a vessel.
So Piccarreta is describing the cosmic, spiritual version of a flow state.
Exactly. When your will aligns with active charity, you are no longer the one lifting the heavy burden. The divine is.
But how do we actually reach that state of surrender? Because I can't just think my way out of being selfish or scared, you know? The panic is real.
And that's where the next impulse from Derek Prince provides the practical bridge.
Right, Derek Prince, he was a prominent Bible teacher. He writes, "Faith is the hand that grasps God's supernatural power."
Let that sink in. The hand that grasps.
Faith grows through obedience.
He circles right back to Bertha Dudde's action faith loop. Dudde said you gain faith through the practice of neighborly love. Prince says faith grows through obedience.
The speaker text for Prince says, "It is not enough to call oneself a Christian. Living faith shows itself in action. Whoever lives in love, whoever trusts God, despite adverse circumstances, experiences the power of God in everyday life."
This is a vital guardrail against toxic passivity.
What do you mean by toxic passivity?
Someone might misunderstand surrender as an excuse to just sit on the couch and wait for a miracle to pay their rent. Like, I surrendered it so I don't have to do anything.
Right. Let go and let God, but used as an excuse to be lazy.
Exactly. But Prince and Dudde are defining faith as a physical muscle. You do not get a strong muscle by sitting still and thinking about lifting weights. You get a strong muscle by picking up the heavy thing.
So obedience, doing the hard, inconvenient work of loving your neighbor when you are exhausted, is the resistance training that builds the muscle of faith.
Yes, you grasp the power with your hand, but you have to actually reach your hand out. And as that muscle grows, it changes how you perceive the obstacles in front of you.
Which brings us to the final two mystics in this section, Thomas von Kempen and Franz von Sales.
These two quotes are incredibly profound.
Let's read them. Thomas von Kempen writes, "Trust God above all, and you will find peace in every need." And Franz von Sales writes, "Do not measure the power of God by your difficulties."
Do not measure the power of God by your difficulties. That is perhaps the most psychologically profound piece of advice in this entire collection.
The commentary explains it further. It says, "Our problems are not bigger than God. Often they are only bigger than our trust. When we learn to think of God as bigger than our fear, the distress transforms into hope."
It is an optical illusion of the mind.
An optical illusion.
Yes. Think about it. When you face a crisis, it sits directly in front of your face. It is like holding a penny right up to your eye. The penny is objectively tiny, but because it is so close to your perspective, it blocks out the entire sun.
Oh, wow. That's a great image.
Because the problem feels infinitely large, any potential solution feels incredibly small by comparison. You are measuring the power of the solution by the terrifying size of the problem in your immediate vision.
You look at a mountain of debt and say, well, the divine is good, but this is $100,000. You are putting a finite ruler up against the infinite.
Exactly. Von Sales is telling you to move the penny away from your eye.
You have to actively visualize the problem as finite. It has a beginning, a boundary, and an end.
If you measure an ocean by the size of a teacup, the teacup seems overwhelming if you have to drink it all. But drop the teacup into the ocean, and it is instantly swallowed.
Which makes perfect logical sense right now while we are sitting here calm and analyzing it. But when it's Tuesday morning and your heart is pounding out of your chest with anxiety, how do you actually drop the teacup?
That is the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what the final section of your dossier addresses.
Yeah.
The document moves from the heights of mysticism down to the gritty reality of human psychology.
Right. It provides a 5-step practical guide to living with God. Nothing is impossible in everyday life.
I want us to walk through these 5 steps slowly, because this is where the mechanics really get tested.
Let's do it. Step 1 is called the phrase for heavy moments. The instruction says, when a situation seems hopeless, consciously say, with God, nothing is impossible. Repeat this phrase calmly and slowly. Let it sink into your heart.
The instruction is incredibly specific. Notice it doesn't say, think about the phrase. It says, consciously say and repeat this phrase calmly and slowly. This is leveraging the meditative use of language to interrupt a neurological panic loop.
What is happening in the brain when we hit that hopeless situation?
When you encounter a crisis, your amygdala, fear center of your brain, essentially hijacks your nervous system. You enter a state of fight, flight, or freeze. Your thoughts begin to spiral violently. I'm ruined, there is no way out. This is a physiological response, not just a bad mood.
Right, your body's preparing for physical danger.
Yes. By forcing yourself to speak a definitive, absolute statement out loud and repeating it slowly, you are engaging the prefrontal cortex to override the amygdala.
You are throwing a verbal wrench into the gears of a panic attack.
Furthermore, the instruction says, let it sink into your heart. In spiritual literature, the heart is the seat of the will. You are moving the concept from intellectual trivia into the core operating system of your belief. You are commanding your internal reality to align with the infinite.
Which prepares the ground for step 2. Connection through love. This is Dude's action faith loop put into daily practice. The text says the revelation emphasizes faith grows through active neighborly love. Ask yourself daily, who can I do good for today? Where can I help? Who can I encourage? Every act of love connects you with God's power.
Notice how the instruction forcefully directs your focus outward. Who can I help? When a human being is in the middle of a crisis, our nature makes us obsessively inward focused. We become the center of the universe, and our pain is the only thing that exists.
It's like a black hole of suffering. The gravity of your own anxiety becomes so dense that it just collapses in on itself, pulling all the light in the room down with it.
That's beautifully put. Step 2 is the escape velocity required to break that gravitational pull. By actively seeking out someone else to serve, you break the obsession with your own ego. You are opening the valve of the plumbing we discussed earlier.
And the text insists these aren't just nice moral thoughts. These are the literal connection points to divine power. If you are terrified about your own life, the mechanism demands you go make someone else's life better.
Yes. The power that flows through you to help them is the very power that heals you.
It is a radically counterintuitive survival strategy. If you are starving, give away your last piece of bread. And that level of radical trust leads directly to step 3, which is arguably the hardest psychological maneuver in the entire document.
Oh, without a doubt.
Step 3 is handing over the distress. The instructions are, take your biggest worry, imagine it visually, and then pray. Father, I hand over this situation to you. I trust your solution. Let go.
Let go. 2 words that require an agonizing amount of vulnerability to execute.
The visualization technique is doing a lot of the heavy lifting here. Imagine it visually. You aren't just saying a vague prayer about being stressed. You have to take the specific, terrifying thing, the impending bankruptcy, the addicted family member, and hold it in your mental hands, and then consciously hand it over.
The profound difficulty here stems from the human illusion of control. We hold on to our worries because the brain falsely equates worrying with problem solving.
Right.
Worry feels like work. It feels responsible.
Oh, I do that all the time. If I'm worrying about it, it means I care.
Exactly. To take your biggest fear and hand it over requires you to admit that you are fundamentally powerless to control the outcome.
And saying, I trust your solution is terrifying because the divine solution might not be what your ego wants. You want the bank account filled. The solution might be learning how to find joy with nothing. It requires absolute surrender.
You are dropping the burden.
Yeah.
But human nature dictates that the moment you drop it, your brain will try to pick it right back up.
Which is exactly why step 4 is necessary. Step 4 is swap worry for trust. The text says, instead of inwardly repeating problems, repeat God's promise. Not what will happen, but rather, God cares for me.
This mirrors the mechanics of cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, but elevated to a spiritual framework.
How so?
CBT operates on identifying cognitive distortions, toxic thought loops, and actively replacing them with truthful statements. The text identifies the toxic loop perfectly. What will happen?
That question is a crap. The future doesn't exist yet. It's just a blank canvas where anxiety paints worst-case scenarios.
You have to execute a cognitive swap. Whenever the brain asks what will happen, you refuse to engage with the speculation. You swap the spiraling question for an anchor statement, God cares for me. It shuts down the future tripping and returns you to the present moment, grounded in the absolute baseline we established at the beginning.
That omnipotent power exists, and it is accessible.
Yes.
It is active mental discipline. You are standing guard at the door of your own mind. Which brings us to the culmination of the entire framework. Step 5, living in confidence.
The final result of the loop.
The text reads, the revelation says, strong faith bans the distress. This does not mean that problems disappear, but that the person becomes inwardly free. Peace is often the first miracle.
Peace is often the first miracle. It is a vital clarification of everything we've discussed.
Because a skeptic could look at this entire deep dive, the action-faith loop, the infinite power, the impossible becoming possible, and say, okay, I did the steps, I helped my neighbor, I handed over the worry, but my car is still broken and my bank account is still empty. The mechanism failed.
The skeptic in that scenario is defining the miracle purely by external material circumstances. They are looking for magic. But Dudde's framework defines the ultimate miracle as internal liberation.
Notice the precise phrasing. Strong faith bans the distress. It does not say it bans the problem. It bans the distress caused by the problem.
The external storm might still be raging, the waves are still crashing against the hull of the boat, but inside the cabin there is absolute silence.
The human becomes inwardly free. You are no longer a hostage to the chaos of your circumstances. You can walk through profound earthly difficulty, but because your will is aligned with the infinite through active charity, you are not crushed by the anxiety.
That internal, unshakable peace is the first empirical evidence that the power has begun to flow through the circuit. The external solutions often follow, in ways that look incomprehensible when earthly hope is gone, but the peace arrives first.
Let's synthesize this incredible framework we've explored today. We began in the ruins of 1947 with Bertha Dudde claiming that human torment is largely an unnecessary choice because limitless power is waiting to be accessed.
We explored the mechanics of that access, the action faith loop, where doing good deeds acts as the copper wire, plugging our finite lives into the infinite grid.
We heard from a historical course of mystics who all validated the same spiritual physics, pointing toward the necessity of ego death, the physical muscle of obedience, and the vital importance of not measuring the infinite by our finite difficulties.
And we walked through a deeply practical blueprint for retraining the human mind to drop the illusion of control, realizing that the ultimate miracle isn't the absence of a storm, but the presence of unshakable peace within it.
Right. And whether one views this collection of texts as literal divine revelation or as a masterful architecture of human resilience and psychology, the framework is incredibly potent.
It demands that we step outside of our own selfish anxieties and actively participate in the healing of the world through unconditional love.
It democratizes power and places the responsibility squarely on our daily actions. Which leaves us with a final provocative concept to mull over. If, as Bertha Dudde suggests, the supernatural is actually just the natural logical consequence of a human will perfectly aligned with active, selfless charity, how might that change the way you view the world around you tomorrow morning?
That's a profound thought.
Think about the purely secular acts of kindness you witness every single day. A stranger paying for someone's groceries, a neighbor shoveling a driveway in the freezing cold, a nurse holding a frightened patient's hand.
Yeah.
If this spiritual physics is accurate, are these just polite human behaviors? Or are you actually surrounded by millions of unrecognized miracles? Are you walking through a world constantly humming with a divine electricity, just waiting for a shift in your own perspective to be seen for the immense power it truly holds?
And the deeper question becomes, what happens to your own seemingly impossible, terrifying problems when you decide to become one of those miracles for someone else?
We don't wake up in the morning sweating, wondering if gravity is going to take the day off. Maybe there is another higher law of physics we could learn to trust just as much.
I love that.
Thank you so much for providing these profound sources. This has been a deeply transformative exploration of the mechanics of belief. Until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.